past wars, it has always been necessary to dispose of an enemy army before being able to destroy, occupy, or dictate terms to the enemy nation. In World War I, no fighting was done on enemy soil. This time it was different. While the principles of war remained unchanged, the use of new weapons revised the concept of war. This time, Germany was faced with a weapon that leaped over battle lines and frontiers and smashed at the ultimate enemy, the German workman who equipped and fed the German soldier. This time, the enemy nation was physically destroyed before its defending army was defeated. World War II witnessed the emergence of a third dimension in warfare, in which the air became a primary theater of operation in addition to the land and the sea. Air power performed a dual role. One function involved direct cooperation with ground and surface forces to defeat the enemy's armies in the field, commonly called the tactical use of air power. The other function involved an independent striking force created to wage air war against the opposing air force and to destroy, as the resultant exploitation of air victory, his resources, industrial capacity, and will to make war. 17 August 1942, strategic air power was born. At 1526 hours, the first daylight mission from a base in England was launched. Flying fortresses carrying about 18 tons of bombs, destined for railroad marshalling yards at Rouen. This was the initial test of the air offensive by day against the powerful German Air Force. Could strategic bombing be maintained? Would it achieve its objective? The answer roared over Germany just 1 year later to the day. 180 forts on their way to Schweinfurt. 3 months later, 228 forts carried 500 tons of bombs to the same target, bringing strategic air power to an impressive peak in the campaign against German aircraft production. The factories at Schweinfurt produced 52% of the total number of anti-friction bearings manufactured in Germany. This concentration of critical production capacity caused the Allied Chiefs of Staff to assign a top priority to the target. At this time, the long-range fighter had not been developed. Fighters did not accompany the bombers to the target area. This day saw the proof that the heavy bomber could not effectively defend itself, and made the development of the long-range fighter an essential to our strategic bombing success. Wave after wave of enemy fighters attacked the unescorted bombers. Was intense, but good visibility enabled the forts to make an accurate run, and all 500 tons were dropped in the target area.
The bombing was very heavy that day. Many buildings were demolished by high explosive bombs. There was much fire from incendiaries. However, our flak batteries and fighters shot down 62 bombers. Inflicted major battle damage upon 17 and damage in varying degrees in 121 more. Personnel casualties in the attacking force must have been large.
599 killed and 40 wounded. A costly day. This had been the heaviest single clash between air forces to date. It's estimated that the enemy lost more than 300 fighter aircraft during the operation. But the fact that this impressive effort to break a vital link in the German war economy failed in actuality is by no means the full measure of its impact upon that economy. It was originally planned to destroy this target in one raid, but the then existing size of our Air Force could not sustain the great losses inflicted upon it, and so was prevented from taking advantage of a follow-up attack to destroy the ball-bearing industry. However, the shattering raid of 14 October shocked the Reich officials into immediate action, and led directly to the dispersal of industry from Schweinfurt and other centralized districts. This dispersal of industry made possible the success of the Allied air campaign against transportation and communications, which in turn brought the German nation to its knees. The history of United States air power will always honor the bloody summer of 1943. Because of the very heavy losses in personnel and aircraft incurred during the Schweinfurt attacks, penetrations beyond the range of fighters were suspended. It was clear that the success of future strategic campaigns and the invasion of the continent depended upon the elimination of the Luftwaffe. The P-47 was equipped with wing tanks which extended its range 300 to 400 miles. The long-range P-51 fighter, capable of escorting the striking force to and from its objective, put in an appearance toward the end of 1943. After a lull during the fall of 1943, when increased numbers of P-51s were being assembled in the United Kingdom, we were completely equipped to effectively carry out the campaign against German fighter production. Attack against airframes was decided upon because airframes as a target system appeared more accessible. Intelligence with regard to engine production was not as thorough. The Erler plant at Heidelberg, Leipzig, was the office and original factory of the complex making 40% of the Me-109 fighters turned out in Germany. The Erler plant was attacked twice during February 1944 and once 4 months later in June. Attacks also were made against two other plants in the Erler complex, those at Machen and Delitzsch.
After the February raids, 65% of the factory floor space at Heidelberg was destroyed. Many completed aircraft and a considerable amount of components were lost at this time. About 450 workers were killed and many important airline company records were burned.
The Germans made no attempt to restore the buildings at Heidelberg. Instead, the undamaged tools were moved to dispersal plants and an overall decentralization plan for the aircraft industry was put in effect. The 27 main fighter factories were dispersed into 760 smaller plants. During the spring of 1944, about half of the planned dispersal was accomplished with only minor disturbance to production.
But Erler and other fighter companies were now compelled to rely upon rail and truck transportation to implement smooth operation of production. German volatility was beginning to grow. At the end of March 1944, when final plans for the Allied invasion of Europe were being drawn up, about 30% of the total petroleum available to Germany came from the refineries at Ploesti in Romania. American air power operating from North Africa made a daring but costly attack upon the Romanian refineries. 8 months later, this attack was followed up by a systematic campaign of destruction from Italian bases, carried on over a period of 5 months, and reduced production at Ploesti to 7% of its normal capacity. With the loss of Ploesti, the synthetic oil plants in the Ruhr in central Germany and in Hamburg became critical. In May 1944, these were made primary targets. The synthetic oil plant at Leuna was the objective of 22 strategic attacks planned to deny oil to the German armed forces. During the whole period between the first attack on 12 May 1944 and the last attack on 4 April 1945, the average daily production of the plant was only 9 or 10% of normal. However, by planning top priority and manpower and equipment, plants that had been knocked out completely were brought back into production in relatively few weeks, thus necessitating renewed attacks. All during the heavy bombing raids, a rapid rate of recuperation was achieved, and in general, repeated air attacks rather than the severity of any single raid gradually resulted in the almost complete breakdown of German oil production. The military consequences of the oil attacks were immediate. The shortage of available fuel necessitated a severe cut in daily sorties by the Luftwaffe, and gasoline allocations for the Army decreased steadily.
The enemy has succeeded in increasing our losses of aviation gasoline up to 90%.
Those were the words of Reichsminister Speer, Tsar of all German production, in a letter to Hitler dated 30 June 1944. Von Rundstedt, too, admitted that lack of fuel was a major factor in the defeat of Nazi armies in the December Ardennes offensive. In effect, the oil campaign proved to be the most immediately catastrophic for all German hopes. The home front sent us more bombers and fighters, and more well-trained pilots, and our fleets grew mightier by the month. But the enemy first-line operational strength, maintained and increased numerically, was thrown into the breach in a desperate effort to stem the air offensive. Our fighters were ordered to seek the enemy instead of waiting for him, and above all, to follow him to his destruction. A gigantic fighter battle raged across the European skies, with victories by our fighters alone of 60, 85, and over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed each day. It was a crucial battle, both sides fighting hard, with air domination itself at stake. This time it was decisive. The Luftwaffe disappeared from the skies, and the day arrived when a huge bomber mission with full fighter escort flew a round trip to Berlin without challenge by a single enemy fighter. Fighters returning from unchallenged escort missions were ordered to seek targets of opportunity. Since the enemy did not come up to fight, down they went to blast his planes and burn them in his airdromes. It was the most savage and devastating fighter attack on record, and the wreckage of Nazi aircraft littered the fields of Europe until the German Air Force was broken forever. Redressed for Invasion Day, the sky looked down on the greatest amphibious operation in the history of modern warfare. After the successful landing on the continent, the Allied Supreme Command decided to use strategic air power against German industrial systems, the loss of which would most rapidly and directly weaken the enemy for the final Allied ground assault. During August, September, and October of 1944, the Allied strategic air forces attacked the majority of motor transport producers in Germany and damaged 9 out of 13 main tank and armored vehicle centers. After the disastrous Ardennes breakthrough and the failure of a German counterattack on the Eastern Front, it was realized that the Nazis